Before I could argue, she reached down to the entryway console table, grabbed a cheap, flimsy plastic container, and shoved it into my hands. "Here," she said dismissively. Brittany packed some extra ham and a scoop of cold potatoes. "Eat it at your apartment. We will call you next week when the house is empty." I looked down at the plastic tub in my hands. The lid was not even on straight. The food inside looked like scraps scraped off someone else's plate. I looked back up at my mother, who was already retreating back into the warmth of the house. "Merry Christmas," she said coldly, and then she shut the heavy wooden door right in my face. The loud click of the deadbolt sliding into place echoed through the freezing night air, leaving me standing completely alone in the dark. I stood on the snowy porch for a moment, staring at the brass numbers on the door. Any other daughter might have broken down right there. Any other person might have pounded their fists against the wood, demanding to be let in, begging for the basic warmth of a family on Christmas Eve. But I did not cry. I did not even feel a lump form in my throat. I just felt a cold, sharp clarity settling over me, crisp as the winter air. I turned around and carefully navigated the icy walkway back to my car, parked down the street. When I finally climbed inside, the interior was freezing. I turned on the engine, blasted the heat, and popped the warped lid off the plastic container. The ham was rigid. The potatoes were a stiff, unappetizing lump, but my stomach was painfully empty. I ate the cold leftovers right there in the driver's seat, watching the snow fall under the streetlights. It tasted like 20 years of resentment, but it gave me the energy I needed for what was coming next. The drive back to the city was quiet. The roads were mostly empty, everyone tucked safely inside their homes. I opened my web browser and bypassed my personal email, navigating directly to a highly secure corporate portal. It was the management site for a private limited liability company, an LLC, that I had quietly registered in Delaware 4 years ago. I typed in my administrative password and hit enter. The dashboard loaded, displaying a single highly valuable asset in its portfolio: a sprawling 4-bedroom colonial house in the affluent Chicago suburbs. The exact house I had just been locked out of. I navigated to the legal forms section, my fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced precision. I generated a specific document, filled in the current date, and clicked print. The laser printer in the corner of my office whirred to life, spitting out 3 crisp white pages. I picked up the document and read the bold black letters at the top: 30-day notice to vacate. A cold, genuine smile finally spread across my face as I grabbed a manila envelope. They said there was no room for me at the table. Tomorrow they would learn they did not even own the table. I did not mail the envelope. I wanted to deliver it personally, though I had no intention of knocking. At 5 in the morning on Christmas Day, before the sun even considered rising over Lake Michigan, I drove back to the sprawling suburban neighborhood. The streets were dead quiet, blanketed in fresh, undisturbed snow. Their house was dark now, the luxury cars still parked haphazardly in the driveway covered in heavy frost. I walked right up to the solid wooden door that had been slammed in my face just hours prior. With a roll of thick packing tape, I secured the manila envelope directly at eye level. I smoothed the tape down flat, making sure it was completely impossible to miss. Then I went back to my condo, turned off my phone, and slept for 14 unbroken hours. His voice cracked with rage, echoing so loudly I had to pull the phone away from my ear. I could hear my mother wailing dramatically in the background, and Brittany shouting something muffled but furious. "You think you can just come to our property in the middle of the night and tape garbage to our front door? Are you completely out of your mind? I am your father." I remained perfectly silent, letting him burn through his initial surge of morning adrenaline. "Answer me!" he roared into the receiver. "You come over here on Christmas Eve looking like a stray dog, embarrass us in front of Andre and his wealthy clients, and then you pull a pathetic stunt like this, a fake eviction notice. Do you know how incredibly illegal it is to forge official legal documents? Andre has a massive team of corporate lawyers on retainer. He took one look at this piece of trash and laughed in my kitchen. We are not playing your petty jealous games anymore, Natalie. If you do not get over here right now, get on your knees and apologize to your mother. I'm calling the local precinct." He paused, gasping for air, but before I could speak, he launched back in his tone, dripping with absolute entitlement. I will have you arrested for trespassing. I will have you charged with harassing homeowners. We have lived in this magnificent house for 20 years. We built this family here. You are completely deranged if you think you can intimidate us with a printed sheet of paper you found on the internet. You are just bitter because Brittany married a successful man and you are completely alone. I listened to his heavy breathing through the phone. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and pressed my bare feet against the cold floor. Are you finished, Dad? I asked. My voice was calm, perfectly measured, and completely devoid of any emotion. It was the exact tone I used when delivering terrible medical news to families in the emergency room. He looked down at me exactly like I was a stubborn child who had just been caught stealing candy. He placed his designer leather briefcase on the table right next to my lunch tray and snapped the shiny golden latches open. Natalie. Natalie. Natalie, Andre said smoothly, shaking his head with mock pity. He deliberately spoke just loud enough for the surrounding hospital staff to clearly hear his deep, authoritative voice. I always knew you were a bit overly dramatic, but trying to illegally evict your own parents during the holiday season, that is a spectacular new low even for someone like you. Fortunately, your little delusional power trip ends right here in this cafeteria today. I narrowed my eyes slightly, refusing to rise to his obvious bait. The eviction notice is perfectly legal, Andre. I own the LLC. The LLC owns the house. It is black and white. You have exactly 29 days left to pack your bags. Andre chuckled softly, pulling a thick stack of stapled legal papers from his briefcase. He dropped the heavy document directly onto my salad, completely ruining my lunch. He leaned in uncomfortably close, his expensive cologne overpowering the institutional smell of the cafeteria food. He smirked right in my face, his eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. You see, Natalie, you might be a decent trauma doctor, but you are a terrible real estate investor. Your pathetic eviction notice will not hold up in any court in this entire state. Because a year ago I discovered your little LLC secret, and I put a permanent legal safeguard in place immediately. You cannot evict anyone because you do not own that house anymore. I do. And if you try to fight me, I will destroy your career. I stared at the thick stack of legal papers he had just dropped onto my lunch. The top page was emblazoned with the words, "Quitclaim deed" in bold official font. I did not need to be a lawyer to know what that meant. It transferred the title of a property from one person to another. My eyes scanned down the page, landing on the signature line at the bottom. There, written in bright blue ink, was my full given name, Natalie Brooks. But it was not my actual signature. The loop on the letter N was entirely wrong, and the slant was simply too aggressive. It was a decent forgery, but a blatant forgery nonetheless. Right next to the fake signature was a bright red notary stamp certifying that I had supposedly signed this binding legal document in person. What exactly is this, Andre? I asked, keeping my voice low so the rest of the bustling cafeteria would not overhear. That is the legal transfer of your little LLC property into the newly established Brooks Family Trust, Andre said smoothly. He puffed out his chest and adjusted his expensive silk tie. You signed it over to my investment firm exactly 12 months ago, designating me as the sole trustee. I realized you were holding this foreclosure secret over your parents' heads. That is severe financial abuse. I took proactive measures to protect their assets from their highly unstable daughter. My mother nodded vigorously, crossing her arms over her chest. It is for the best, Natalie. You clearly lack the emotional maturity to handle massive real estate investments. Andre is a certified professional. He knows how to manage wealth and keep it safely within the family. I looked at my mother, genuinely marveling at her absolute delusion. You forged my signature, I said flatly. This is not just a petty family argument anymore. This is a very serious federal crime. You committed blatant real estate fraud. Brittany scoffed loudly, tossing her perfectly styled blonde hair over her shoulder. Oh, please, Natalie, stop being dramatic. Nobody forged anything. You signed it at our summer barbecue last year, after having too many margaritas. You just blacked out and forgot all about it. We all saw you. My father cleared his throat nervously. He looked down at his polished leather shoes before forcing himself to meet my cold gaze. Yes, we were all there. You signed willingly. I looked at the four of them standing around my table. They had rehearsed this insane lie. They sat down in the house I bought to save them from ruin and conspired to steal it. They hired a corrupt notary from Andre brokerage firm to stamp a fake document, and now they were confidently gaslighting me. The sheer audacity was impressive. You really think a fake notary stamp from your shady firm is going to stop me? I asked, sliding the heavy document back across the table. I will have a top forensic handwriting expert tear this garbage to shreds by Friday. I will drag all of you into civil court and hand the evidence directly to the district attorney. Andre did not flinch. His smug smile only widened. He leaned forward aggressively, placing both hands flat on the table and invading my personal space. His voice dropped to a sinister whisper meant only for my ears. You are not going to call a handwriting expert, Natalie, and you are not calling the district attorney. And why is that? I challenged, meeting his arrogant glare. Because if you ever contest this deed, Andre whispered, his eyes cold and dead, I will personally file a formal complaint with the state medical board tomorrow morning. I will tell them I witnessed you stealing highly restricted prescription drugs from the emergency room supply cabinet to feed your addiction. My blood ran ice cold. You are out of your mind. They would drug test me and find absolutely nothing. Andre chuckled darkly. Sure they would. Eventually, but an accusation of narcotic theft from a prominent family member triggers an automatic suspension pending a full investigation. You would be escorted out of this hospital today. You would lose your income, your reputation, and possibly your medical license while paying hundreds of thousands to defend yourself. He tapped his index finger sharply against the forged deed. So, doctor, here is your new reality. You can walk away quietly, go straight back to your lonely condo, and let the adults handle the family assets. Or you can fight me, and I will make sure you never practice emergency medicine ever again. I stared at Andre, letting the silence stretch between us. Inside my chest, my heart was pounding a steady, furious rhythm, but I forced my exterior to crumble. I needed them to believe they had won. I let my shoulders slump. I widened my eyes just a fraction, allowing a flicker of manufactured panic to show. I slowly pulled my hands off the table and dropped them into my lap, breaking eye contact with his cold, dead stare. You would not actually do that, I whispered, injecting a slight tremble into my voice. You would destroy my entire life over a house. Andre stood up straight, brushing an invisible speck of dust off his custom lapel. He looked incredibly satisfied. I am protecting my family, Natalie. You forced my hand. Now be a good girl, take your little eviction notice and throw it in the trash. We will not be having this conversation again. My mother let out a loud, theatrical sigh of relief, patting my father on the arm. Thank God there is finally an adult in charge of this situation, she muttered. Brittany scoffed, grabbing her designer purse. Come on, everyone. I cannot stand the smell of this cafeteria anymore. Let us go celebrate Andre and his brilliant legal mind. I sat perfectly still, staring at my ruined salad as they marched out of the cafeteria like conquering heroes. I waited until the heavy double doors swung shut behind them before I finally exhaled. The trembling in my hands vanished instantly. I pulled out my phone and snapped a clear, high-resolution photo of the forged quitclaim deed Andre had so arrogantly left on my table. He thought he had trapped me with a threat to my medical license. He did not realize he had just handed me the physical evidence of his own federal crime. But my family was not done trying to break me. Emboldened by my apparent surrender, Brittany decided to take her victory lap to social media. By 6 o'clock that evening, my phone began vibrating non-stop. I opened Instagram and saw that Brittany had tagged me in a highly produced, tearful video. She was sitting on the plush sofa in the house I owned, wearing a simple, oversized sweater to look vulnerable. She had wiped off all her makeup, though I could tell she had carefully applied blush to make her nose look red from crying. She stared directly into the camera, squeezing out fake tears. "I never thought I would have to make a video like this," Brittany began, her voice quivering perfectly. "But my older sister, who is a very wealthy and successful doctor, is trying to illegally evict our elderly parents from their forever home. She is using her money and power to bully them just because she has always been jealous of my marriage to Andre. She wants to throw them out into the freezing snow right after Christmas. I am just so heartbroken that greed can destroy a family like this. Please send prayers for my parents." Within an hour, the video had thousands of views, and then the text messages from our extended family started pouring in. My phone screen lit up like a slot machine with notifications. Aunt Martha texted, "How could you be so cruel to your own mother? You are a monster." Cousin David wrote, "I always knew you were a cold person, but making your parents homeless, you are sick. Do not ever speak to me again." Uncle George chimed in, "Your grandfather would be ashamed of the greedy woman you have become." They flooded my inbox with hateful, vicious words. They called me selfish, psychotic, and money-hungry. They demanded I drop the eviction immediately and apologize to Brittany for causing her so much emotional distress. Any normal person would have been crushed by the weight of their entire extended family turning against them. But as I sat on my modern living room sofa reading message after message, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical focus. I did not reply to a single text. I did not post a defensive comment on Brittany video. I simply took screenshots of every single message documenting the harassment. I was building a timeline. I set my phone to silent and walked over to my desk. I pulled the high-resolution photo of the forged deed and printed it out on specialized glossy paper. Andre thought his threat would paralyze me, but he vastly underestimated how a trauma doctor handles a crisis. We do not panic, we isolate the problem, and we cut it out. The next morning, on my single day off, I did not go to the hospital. I drove to a nondescript office building downtown. I walked through the glass doors and sat across from a retired FBI agent who now ran the premier forensic handwriting analysis firm in Chicago. I slid the glossy printout of the forged deed across his heavy mahogany desk. He put on his reading glasses and leaned in closely. I needed absolute proof, and I was going to get it. The expert adjusted his reading glasses, holding the glossy printout under a bright, specialized magnifying lamp. It took him less than 5 minutes to confirm what I already knew. He pointed out the unnatural stops and starts in the ink flow, a dead giveaway of someone painstakingly copying a name rather than writing it fluidly. I officially retained his professional services right then and there. I did not stop there. I also hired their absolute best top private investigator to run a comprehensive background check on Andre and his investment firm. I wanted every bank record, every tax filing, and every corporate footprint he had ever left behind. I wrote a retainer check and walked out feeling more empowered than ever. By the time I drove back to my condo, my phone was ringing again. This time it was my mother. I answered, forcing my voice to sound exhausted. Natalie Susan said sharply, skipping any form of greeting. "Your sister is having a complete nervous breakdown because of your little stunt. She is inconsolable. Andre is trying to focus on hosting his most important investors for a massive New Year Eve gala at the house, and your selfish behavior has ruined the holiday spirit." I pinched the bridge of my nose, playing my part perfectly. "What do you want, Mom? If you want to remain in this family, you are going to make this right," she demanded. "The catering bill for the gala is $15,000. Andre has his money tied up in high-yield offshore accounts right now, and Brittany cannot afford it. You make a doctor's salary. You are going to pay the caterer. Consider it an apology tax for the immense stress you have caused us." A year ago, I would have cried. I would have argued that $15,000 was a ridiculous amount of money for a single party. I would have begged them to just love me without a price tag. But now I saw exactly what they were doing. They thought Andre's threat had terrified me, and now they were swooping in to extract cash from their favorite ATM. Fine, I said, keeping my voice small and compliant. Send me the invoice. I will pay it today. My mother scoffed. See, learn your place, Natalie. She hung up. 10 minutes later, an email arrived from Brittany containing the catering invoice. It was from a highly exclusive upscale event company in downtown Chicago. I opened it. They wanted me to wire the $15,000 directly to secure the reservation for New Year Eve. But as I looked closely at the wire transfer instructions at the bottom of the page, my analytical mind caught a glaring inconsistency. The routing number did not belong to a corporate catering account. The beneficiary name listed was a subsidiary holding company. I quickly ran a public records search on the subsidiary name. My jaw clenched as the results populated on my screen. The holding company was registered to the exact same commercial address as Andre Investment Firm. They were not just making me pay for a party. Andre was actively funneling my $15,000 directly back into his own pocket, likely using a cheap local vendor for the actual food, and keeping the massive difference. He was skimming money right out in the open. I did not hesitate. I logged in and wired the money. I wanted that digital paper trail. I wanted undeniable proof of exactly where my money was going and who was receiving it. I printed the confirmation and placed it safely into a secure folder labeled Evidence. I spent the evening organizing the documents. The fake deed, the text messages, the routing numbers. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, painting a picture of a man desperate for cash. Just before 9 o'clock, my cell phone vibrated across the wooden desk. It was the private investigator I had hired that morning. I picked it up immediately, pressing the speaker button so I could take notes. Dr. Brooks, the investigator, said, his voice completely devoid of any casual warmth. I have been digging into your brother-in-law for the past 8 hours. I thought you should know this immediately before you interact with him again. What exactly did you just find? I asked quietly, leaning forward in my desk chair. The investigator sighed heavily on the other end. Your brother-in-law, Andre, is entirely a financial ghost. Andre is not a licensed wealth manager. He currently holds absolutely no certifications with the Securities and Exchange Commission, and he has never been legally registered to trade or manage money in the state of Illinois or anywhere else. Whatever he is doing with your family money, it is completely illegal and highly dangerous. I hung up the phone with the private investigator, the heavy silence of my apartment pressing against my ears. Completely illegal and highly dangerous. The words echoed in my mind. Andre was not just a manipulative narcissist skimming catering money. He was orchestrating a massive financial fraud, and my parents were right in the middle of it. I did not sleep that night. I spent hours building a secure digital vault, uploading every piece of evidence, every audio file, every screenshot. The next morning, I was standing in my kitchen brewing a strong pot of coffee when the intercom buzzed. Before I could even walk over to the wall screen, a loud, aggressive pounding echoed directly from my front door. I frowned. My building had strict security protocols. Nobody came up unannounced. But as I checked the security camera feed on my phone, my stomach tightened. It was my mother and father. They must have slipped past the front desk by tailgating a resident into the elevator. I unlocked the door and pulled it open just a few inches. Before I could say a single word, my father shoved his weight against the solid wood, forcing the door wide open and storming into my living room. My mother followed right behind him, her nose turned up as she inspected my pristine apartment with obvious disdain. "What are you doing here?" I demanded, taking a defensive step back. "You cannot just force your way into my home." Richard ignored my warning. He reached into his heavy winter coat pocket and pulled out a thick cream-colored envelope. He aggressively slapped it down onto my marble kitchen island. "We are here to put an end to this embarrassing temper tantrum," he barked, his face already turning a splotchy, angry red. "Andre was generous enough to have his corporate legal team draft a formal apology and a full retraction of your ridiculous eviction notice. You are going to sign it right now." I stared at the envelope, barely suppressing a laugh. Andre did not have a corporate legal team. He barely had a legitimate business license. And if I refuse, I asked, crossing my arms defensively over my chest. Susan stepped forward, her eyes narrowing into malicious slits. You do not have a choice, Natalie. You have already caused enough damage. Brittany was up all night crying because of your cruelty. You are going to sign that apology, and you are going to publicly post it on your social media accounts so our friends and family know you were just acting out of stress. It is the only way you are ever being welcomed back into this family. I looked at the two of them standing in my kitchen. They were so utterly brainwashed, so desperate to maintain their fake high society image, that they were willing to sacrifice their actual daughter to protect a con artist. I am not signing anything, I said, my voice dropping to a cold, hard register. And you need to leave my apartment right now before I have you officially removed. My father's face contorted with pure, unadulterated rage. He looked around wildly, his eyes landing on my open laptop, sitting at the edge of the kitchen island. It was the same laptop I had used to order the eviction, the same laptop currently holding the forensic evidence. You ungrateful, malicious little brat, he screamed, lunging forward. He grabbed the heavy metal edge of my expensive laptop, raising it high into the air, with both hands fully intending to smash it against the marble countertop, to destroy whatever he thought I was working on. But I was faster. I did not scream. I did not try to physically wrestle a grown man. I simply took one step back, reached over to the wall console, and slammed my palm against the red emergency security button. A loud, piercing alarm instantly buzzed in the hallway. My father froze, the laptop still hovering dangerously above his head. I just summoned the building security team and the police, I said calmly, not breaking eye contact for a second. If you smash that computer, you will be leaving this building in handcuffs for the destruction of private property. Put it down, now. He stared at me, breathing heavily, realizing I was absolutely serious. Slowly, his hands trembling with fury, he lowered the laptop back onto the counter. A moment later, two large uniformed security guards burst through the open front door. Dr. Brooks, is everything all right? The lead guard asked, placing his hand firmly on his radio. These two individuals trespassed into my building and threatened me. I said, my voice steady and professional. Please escort them off the premises immediately. If they resist, call the local precinct. The guard stepped forward, grabbing my father by the arm. He tried to yank himself free, but the guard grip was iron. Susan's face went pale with absolute shock. She could not believe I was actually having them thrown out like common criminals. As the guards physically dragged my father toward the hallway, Susan backed out the door, her face twisting into an ugly, venomous sneer. You are just jealous, she screamed, her voice echoing down the pristine hallway for all my wealthy neighbors to hear. You have always been jealous of Brittany. You are just a bitter, lonely girl who cannot stand that Andre is a millionaire making us 20% returns a month. You will die alone, Natalie. The heavy door clicked shut behind them, cutting off her hysterical screaming. The silence returned to my apartment. I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the closed door. My heart was pounding, but not from fear. My mother's parting insult echoed relentlessly in my brain. Making us 20% returns a month. A cold, terrifying realization washed over me. My parents had not just signed a fake deed to protect their asset. They were completely broke. They had been facing foreclosure 4 years ago. Where would they possibly get the money to invest in Andre fake wealth fund? The pieces of the puzzle aggressively snapped together. They did not just let Andre manage their money, they gave him real money. I needed to find out exactly where that money came from. I walked straight back to my kitchen island where my laptop was still resting safely on the cool marble. I flipped the screen open. My hands hovered over the keyboard. I knew my parents had no savings. 4 years ago, their bank accounts were entirely drained. They possessed absolutely zero liquid assets. Yet Susan had confidently screamed that Andre was making them 20% returns a month on their investment. There was only one asset they had access to: the house. My house. I immediately logged onto the Cook County Clerk website. I navigated to the public property records database and typed in the exact address of the suburban colonial. The system buffered for a few agonizing seconds before populating a long list of recorded documents. I scrolled past the original deed, past the foreclosure notice from 4 years ago, and past the legitimate transfer to my LLC. Then my eyes locked onto the two most recent filings. The first was the forged quitclaim deed transferring the property into the Brooks Family Trust, officially recorded exactly 11 months ago. Andre had actually filed the fraudulent paperwork with the county to make it look legitimate. But it was the second document filed just 2 weeks after the fake deed that made my blood run entirely cold. It was labeled as a commercial deed of trust. I paid the standard $20 credit card fee to download the full PDF document. As the file opened on my screen, I began reading the dense legal jargon. My parents and Andre, acting as the trustee, had taken out a massive loan against the property. The principal amount was staggering: $600,000. They had used my house as collateral to pull out $600,000 in raw cash. That was the money they gave to Andre for his fake investment fund. But the worst part was not the amount. It was the lender. I scanned the document for the name of the financial institution. I expected to see a traditional commercial bank, maybe a well-known local credit union. Instead, the lender was listed as Obsidian Capital Creditors. I opened a new browser tab and ran a quick search on the company. They were not a bank. They were a shadow banking firm, a hard money lender that operated in the highly unregulated, murky gray area of commercial real estate finance. Hard money loans are specifically designed for desperate people who cannot secure traditional financing. They completely bypass traditional credit checks and income verification, focusing entirely on the raw equity of the collateral. The terms are notoriously predatory. I looked back at the PDF to check the interest rate. It was absolutely astronomical. 18% annually, with massive mandatory monthly interest-only payments required just to keep the loan out of default. It was a massive financial death trap. I sat back in my chair staring at the screen in pure disbelief. My parents had risked everything committing federal real estate fraud to steal my house just so they could mortgage it to the hilt with a predatory lender and hand the cash over to a confident con artist. And Andre, the brilliant wealth manager, had happily facilitated the entire illegal transaction to fund his own Ponzi scheme. But Ponzi schemes require a constant influx of new money to pay those exorbitant interest rates. And based on my private investigator report, Andre Fund was completely broke. I clicked back over to the county clerk database and refreshed the page, searching for any additional filings under the Obsidian Capital creditor's name attached to the property. A new document populated at the very top of the list. It had been officially filed and recorded just 3 days ago, right before Christmas Eve. The document title was Notice of Default and Intent to Foreclose. They had stopped making the monthly payments. The hard money loan was officially in default. I dug deeper into Obsidian Capital creditors, reading through various financial forums, legal blogs, and Better Business Bureau complaints. The reviews were terrifying. Obsidian was not a standard corporate lender that politely sent late notices in the mail. They were effectively high-level, dangerous debt collectors with a reputation for extreme ruthlessness. They employed aggressive field agents who utilized severe intimidation tactics, relentless harassment, and immediate aggressive asset seizure to recover their money. They did not care about family drama or holiday seasons. They only cared about liquidating the collateral to recoup their $600,000. Suddenly, the lavish New Year Eve party my parents were planning made perfect, terrifying sense. They were not celebrating Andre's success. They were throwing a desperate, flashy gala to lure in new, unsuspecting investors. They needed fresh victims to inject cash into the Ponzi scheme so they could pay off the shadow lenders before the debt collectors showed up at their front door. The eviction notice I had taped to their door was the least of their problems. I was trying to legally remove them through the proper channels. The people they actually owed money to would not be nearly as polite. They had stolen my house to play a high-stakes financial game, and they had spectacularly lost. And now the shadow lenders were coming to collect. I knew I had to act fast before the shadow lenders blew my entire investigation wide open. Obsidian Capital would not politely knock on the front door. They would kick it entirely off the hinges. Before that violent reality crashed down on my family, I needed the absolute final nail in Andre's coffin. I needed the man who had officially certified the fake deed. I pulled up the high-resolution scan of the fraudulent document on my laptop and zoomed in tightly on the notary stamp. The name was boldly printed inside the bright red circle: Mitchell Peterson. A quick public records search showed he rented a tiny commercial workspace in a rundown strip mall just 3 blocks away from Andre's fake investment firm. I did not call ahead to make an appointment. At exactly noon the next day, I parked my car in the fading asphalt lot and walked straight into his office. The little brass bell above the glass door chimed thinly. Mitchell Peterson was sitting behind a heavily cluttered metal desk, stamping a large stack of mundane car title transfers. He was a thin, pale man in his late 50s, wearing a cheap polyester suit that hung loosely off his narrow shoulders. He looked up, clearly annoyed by the interruption, but his expression quickly shifted to mild confusion when he saw me standing there in my sharply tailored winter coat. "May I help you?" he asked, his voice reedy and thin. I closed the door behind me and locked the deadbolt with a loud, definitive click. I reached deep into my coat pocket, blindly pressed the record button on my smartphone, and then pulled out the glossy printout of the forged quitclaim deed. I walked forward with measured steps and placed it flat on his messy desk right over his car titles. "I am Dr. Natalie Brooks," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and cold. "You notarized this legal document transferring my private home into a fake family trust exactly 11 months ago. I am here to discuss your impending federal prison sentence." Mitchell stared down at the paper, all the remaining color rapidly draining from his face. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "I do not know what you are talking about," he stammered, gripping the sharp edge of his desk. "I process hundreds of documents every single week. People show me their identification, and I stamp the paperwork. That is all I do." But I was not just listening to his weak, pathetic denial. I was observing him with the highly trained eye of an emergency room attending physician. I noticed the fine, rapid resting tremor in both of his hands. I saw the excessive diaphoresis, the heavy beads of cold sweat forming along his receding hairline, despite the chilly draft blowing through the room. I noted the slight, undeniable yellowish tint in the sclera of his eyes. "You have a severe hepatic issue," I said calmly, leaning forward over his desk to invade his space. "You are likely facing early-stage liver failure, combined with advanced hypertension. That severe tremor in your hands is not just fear, Mitchell. It is active withdrawal. You are a functioning alcoholic whose body is actively shutting down." He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He just stared up at me in pure, unadulterated terror. I leaned in even closer, dropping my voice to a dangerous whisper. "Forging a property deed to facilitate a $600,000 fraudulent loan is a Class 2 federal felony. When I take this direct evidence to the district attorney tomorrow morning, you are looking at a mandatory minimum of 10 years in a federal penitentiary." I let that dark reality hang heavily in the quiet room. "Given your current physiological deterioration," I continued clinically, "your liver will likely fail completely within the first 24 months of your sentence. Prison medical facilities are notoriously slow and underfunded. You will not get a transplant. You will die in a concrete cell, shaking and terrified. Or you can tell me exactly what Andre forced you to do right now. If you do, I will hand the federal prosecutor a recorded confession that gives you full immunity as a cooperating witness. The choice is entirely yours, Mitchell. But you have exactly 30 seconds to decide before I unlock that door and walk straight to the police station." He looked at the locked door, then back at the forged deed on his desk. The tremor in his hands worsened violently. He collapsed back into his cheap office chair, burying his sweaty face in his palms. A ragged sob tore through his thin chest. "He made me do it," Mitchell cried out, his voice cracking with absolute despair. "I owed him money. I made a terrible bet on the market and borrowed cash from him to cover it. When I could not pay him back, he showed up here with that deed already signed. He said if I just stamped it, my massive debt would be entirely forgiven." I kept my expression stone cold, making sure the phone in my pocket was capturing every single word clearly. "Why did he need you to stamp a forged deed to a suburban house?" I asked, pressing him hard for the final piece of the puzzle. "Why take such a massive legal risk?" Mitchell looked up, his eyes bloodshot and wide with absolute panic. He wiped a trembling hand across his forehead. "Because he is completely broke, Dr. Brooks. His entire investment firm is a massive hollow lie. He does not trade a single stock or manage any real wealth. He just takes new money from gullible people to pay off the old investors. It is a textbook Ponzi scheme, and it totally collapsed a year ago. He needed the raw equity from your house to take out a high-interest shadow loan just to keep his most dangerous clients from killing him." I left Mitchell Peterson sobbing quietly in his cramped office. The heavy brass bell chimed as I pulled the glass door shut, stepping back out into the freezing Chicago afternoon. I pressed save on my phone screen, officially locking his full recorded confession into my secure digital vault. I had the smoking gun. Andre was a fraud. My parents were complicit, and their entire financial house of cards was currently sitting on a lit stick of dynamite. I did not have to wait long for the explosion. 3 days later, I was charting patient files in the hospital break room. The emergency room had been relatively calm that morning, allowing me a rare moment of peace with a hot cup of coffee. That peace shattered the second my phone screen lit up. The caller ID flashed with my sister name. Brittany rarely called me directly unless she needed money or wanted to insult my lifestyle choices. I accepted the call, pressing the phone to my ear. "Natalie, you have to help us!" Brittany cried loudly into the receiver. Her voice was shaking, high-pitched and completely frantic. It was not her usual performative Instagram-ready crying. This was raw, unfiltered panic. In the background, I could clearly hear heavy rhythmic pounding on a solid wooden door, followed by the muffled sound of my father shouting nervously. "What is going on?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly neutral and leaning back against the vinyl sofa. "We are victims of a massive identity theft ring," she sobbed, breathing heavily, as if she had just run a marathon. "Some dangerous criminals stole Mom and Dad identities. They forged a bunch of real estate documents and took out a massive loan using the house. Now these huge, terrifying men in dark suits are banging on the front door. They just parked a black SUV across the driveway, and they are refusing to leave. They told Dad they are here to collect on a default and threatened to seize his luxury vehicles." I stared blankly at the break room wall. The shadow lenders had arrived. Obsidian Capital creditors did not waste any time sending polite letters in the mail. They sent physical field agents to enforce their predatory terms. "Did you call the police?" I asked casually, knowing exactly why they had not dialed 911. "No, we cannot involve the police yet," Brittany stammered quickly, her lie stumbling out in a panicked rush. "Andre said the police will just freeze all our bank accounts while they investigate the fraud, and then we will have absolutely no access to our money to pay for the New Year Eve gala. Andre knows how to handle these types of complex corporate misunderstandings, but he has all his capital tied up in offshore accounts right now. We need cash to get these thugs off our lawn before the neighbors see them." "How much cash?" I asked flatly, taking a slow sip of my black coffee. $50,000, Brittany blurted out. "Just wire $50,000 to Andre's account right now. He can use it to pay off the immediate collection fee and buy us enough time to hire specialized fraud lawyers to clear Mom and Dad names. Please, Natalie, you are a successful doctor. You have that kind of money just sitting uselessly in your savings account. We are family. You have to save us." I almost laughed out loud at the absolute absurdity of her demand. Even with dangerous debt collectors literally pounding on their front door, they were still trying to scam me. They wanted my $50,000 to toss to the shadow lenders just to keep the wolves at bay for a few more days. They just wanted to buy enough time to throw their lavish party and trap more innocent investors into Andre's collapsed Ponzi scheme. They were perfectly willing to drain my bank account to fund their criminal enterprise. I am not sending you a single dollar, Brittany, I said clearly, my voice cold and firm. What do you mean you are not sending it? She gasped, her panic instantly morphing into vicious, entitled anger. Are you completely deaf? I just told you our parents are being threatened by violent criminals outside their own home. They are going to break the windows. I told you days ago that it is not their home, I reminded her smoothly. And if they really are victims of identity theft, they need to call the federal authorities. Tell Andre to walk outside and explain his offshore capital situation to the men in the black SUV. I am sure they will be very understanding of his corporate misunderstandings. You selfish, greedy psycho! Brittany screamed into the phone, her voice cracking with hysterical rage. Mom is crying hysterically in the kitchen. Dad is clutching his chest. They are elderly and terrified. These men look like literal mobsters. You took a medical oath to save lives, Natalie. If you do not send this money right now, and Mom or Dad drops dead from a massive heart attack, their blood will be completely on your hands. You will be a murderer. I held the phone away from my ear, letting Brittany scream until her voice went hoarse. When she paused for breath, I delivered my final diagnosis. I am an emergency physician, Brittany, I said calmly. I deal with actual life or death emergencies every day. The consequences of your husband running a Ponzi scheme do not constitute a medical emergency. Do not call me again. I pressed end, cutting off whatever hysterical threat she was preparing. I slipped the phone into my pocket and walked back out to the floor. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of focused chaos. Setting a broken arm and stabilizing a patient with respiratory distress felt grounding after dealing with the toxic delusions of my family. By the time I finally clocked out and changed into my street clothes, the winter sun had set, plunging the city back into freezing darkness. I took the employee elevator down to the underground parking garage. The concrete space was dimly lit and mostly empty. I walked toward my sedan, mentally running through my grocery list, when a tall figure suddenly stepped out from the shadows behind a concrete pillar. I stopped instantly, my hand dropping into my coat pocket to grip my keys. It was Andre. He looked significantly different than the smug wealth manager who had ambushed me in the cafeteria. His custom suit was wrinkled, his silk tie pulled loose, and the arrogant smile was gone. He looked exhausted, desperate, and incredibly dangerous. Natalie, he said, his voice echoing loudly. He took a calculated step toward me, trying to project the corporate authority he no longer possessed. We need to have a serious conversation like two rational adults. You are trespassing in a secure employee facility, I replied, maintaining a clear path to the exit. Considering the violent debt collectors surrounding my parents' house, I am surprised you found time to track me down. His jaw clenched. He hated that his carefully constructed illusion had completely shattered. He held up his hands placatingly, though his eyes remained dark. Listen to me, he said smoothly, trying to fall back into his sales pitch. This situation has been drastically blown out of proportion. I am managing a complex portfolio restructuring. Obsidian Capital is just being aggressive about a temporary liquidity bottleneck. If you wire that $50,000 to clear the immediate default, I can stabilize the fund and generate massive returns for everyone. I stared at him, amazed by his sociopathic commitment to the lie. There is no fund, Andre, I said coldly. You are running a Ponzi scheme and you burned through the $600,000 you stole from my house equity. I have a recorded confession from Mitchell Peterson detailing how you forced him to stamp a forged signature. Your game is over. The facade finally dropped. The smooth-talking manager vanished, replaced by a cornered animal. Andre closed the distance, backing me up against the driver's side door of my car. He slammed his hand onto the roof, leaning down to intimidate me with his physical size. You think you hold all the cards? He snarled, his breath pluming in the freezing air. You think you can run to the police and play the righteous victim? You really need to think about the collateral damage, Dr. Brooks. I looked up at him, my expression blank. Explain it to me then. Andre let out a cruel laugh. I did not act alone, Natalie. Your parents signed those loan origination documents right alongside me. They legally authorized the transfer of funds. If you take that recording to federal authorities and expose the loan as fraudulent, I will go to prison. But Richard and Susan will go straight to federal prison right next to me for wire fraud and conspiracy. They are legally bound to this entire operation. He leaned in closer, a malicious gleam returning to his eyes. You turn me in. You send your own elderly parents to a penitentiary. You destroy your own flesh and blood. So you are going to wire me that money tonight and keep your mouth shut, because I know you cannot stomach being the one who destroys this family. I stood pressed against my car door, looking into the eyes of a man who thought he had backed me into an inescapable corner. I did not flinch. I did not panic. I simply looked at him and smiled. It was a cold, clinical smile that made the triumph instantly vanish from his face. I am a doctor, Andre, I said softly. I triage. Sometimes you have to amputate the rotting limbs to save the body. I left him standing alone in the freezing underground garage. I unlocked my car, slid into the driver's seat, and drove away without looking back. Andre thought the threat of federal prison would force me into submission, but he fundamentally misunderstood my priorities. I had already mourned the loss of my parents. I had already accepted that my sister was a lost cause. I was no longer trying to save them. I was meticulously planning their total extraction from my life. When I returned to my condo, I did not call the police. I opened my laptop and pulled up the corporate registry for Obsidian Capital creditors. I bypassed the generic customer service numbers and tracked down the direct office line for their senior managing partner of asset recovery, a man named Dominic Mercer. I left a concise, highly professional voicemail stating that I was the true legal owner of the collateral currently under default, and I had a proposition that would guarantee their immediate payout without a messy legal battle. At 8 o'clock the next morning, I was sitting in a sleek, glass-walled boardroom on the top floor of a downtown financial high-rise. Dominic Mercer walked in. He was a broad-shouldered man in an immaculate dark suit, radiating the kind of ruthless corporate energy that made Andre look like a cheap amateur. He sat across from me, steepling his fingers on the polished oak table. Dr. Brooks Mercer began, his voice deep and entirely devoid of warmth. Your brother-in-law is in default on a $600,000 commercial loan. My field agents are currently preparing to seize the property. If you came here to beg for an extension on behalf of your family, you are wasting my valuable time. I reached into my leather tote bag and slid a pristine manila folder across the large table. I did not come here to beg for anything, Mr. Mercer. I came here to offer you a highly lucrative shortcut. Mercer raised a single eyebrow, opening the folder. Inside were the forensic handwriting analysis reports, the high-resolution scans of the forged deed, and a printed transcript of the notary fully confessing to the federal real estate fraud. I watched his cold eyes scan the documents. The deed your company currently holds is entirely fraudulent, I explained calmly. My parents and Andre forged my signature to steal the equity. If I walk into the federal prosecutor office today with this undeniable evidence, this entire matter becomes a massive criminal investigation. The house will be locked up as federal evidence in a complex wire fraud case. It will sit in legal limbo for years. You will not be able to foreclose. You will not be able to sell it, and you will not see a single dime of your money until the federal courts finally untangle the mess. Mercer closed the folder, his expression tightening slightly. He knew I was absolutely right. Shadow lenders operated on speed and liquid assets. Having a major asset frozen by the federal government was their absolute worst nightmare. He leaned back in his heavy leather chair, studying me with a newfound calculated respect. What exactly is your proposition, Dr. Brooks? He asked quietly. I kept my posture perfectly straight, my voice steady. I will not go to the authorities regarding the property deed. In fact, I will willingly sign a legitimate legally binding transfer of the house directly to Obsidian Capital creditors today. I will provide you with a crystal clear title. You can take full possession of the property and flip it immediately to recoup your entire principal investment. Mercer narrowed his eyes, deeply suspicious of the sudden generosity. You are just going to willingly hand over a massive suburban property to save your family from a fraud charge. I smiled coldly, shaking my head. Absolutely not. I am handing it over to destroy them completely. I will sign the house over to your firm right now on one strict non-negotiable condition. Mercer leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table, thoroughly intrigued. Name your condition. I leaned forward as well, matching his ruthless corporate energy. You take the absolute rights to the house to clear the initial principal loan amount, but you do not forgive a single cent of the accumulated interest, the massive late fees, or the default penalties. You legally bind my parents and Andre to the remainder of that debt. I want you to unleash your most aggressive collection agents to go after every single dime they have left. I want you to bankrupt them, drain their fake investment fund, and ruin them. They locked me out on Christmas Eve because I was not wealthy enough for their table. Now they will have absolutely nothing. Mercer stared at me for a long moment, the heavy silence of the boardroom stretching between us. A slow, predatory smile finally spread across his face. You are a remarkably ruthless woman, Dr. Brooks, he said, pulling a heavy platinum pen from his breast pocket. I can certainly appreciate that kind of business acumen. We have a deal. Within the hour, his legal team had drafted the necessary paperwork. I signed my name in clean fluid strokes, officially transferring the clear title of the Suburban Colonial directly to Obsidian Capital creditors. I also signed an affidavit confirming the previous deed was a forgery, effectively washing my hands of the massive debt while legally transferring the full burden onto Richard, Susan, and Andre. The trap was set. The fuse was lit. All I had to do now was wait for the inevitable explosion. Meanwhile, completely oblivious to the massive financial guillotine hovering directly over their heads, my family was busy planning the social event of the season. Through the constant barrage of Brittany's social media updates, I watched them gleefully burn through the absolute last remaining dollars of their stolen loan money. They were renting massive crystal chandeliers, hiring a live classical string quartet, and ordering imported beluga caviar. They lived in a complete fantasy world, desperately trying to project an image of untouchable wealth to lure fresh victims into Andre's collapsed Ponzi scheme. On the morning of New Year Eve, my phone rang. It was Brittany again. She acted as if our last conversation, where she accused me of trying to murder our parents with a heart attack, had never even happened. Her ability to compartmentalize her own toxic behavior was truly a psychological marvel. Natalie Brittany chirped, her voice dripping with fake syrupy sweetness. The house looks absolutely incredible. The floral arrangements just arrived, and Andre is picking up the vintage champagne. The new investors are going to be completely blown away by our lifestyle. I held the phone to my ear, staring out at the frozen Chicago skyline. And what exactly does this have to do with me, Brittany? Well, Mom and Dad were talking, and we all agreed that it would look highly suspicious if you were not there tonight, she explained, her tone shifting into a demanding whine. Andre is pitching a massive new wealth portfolio. These investors need to see that we are a solid, highly successful family unit. Having a prominent doctor sister mingling in the crowd adds credibility to his brand. We need you to come and play the happy, supportive sister. She paused, and then added the manipulative kicker. Plus, it will show Mom and Dad that you are finally ready to apologize for your completely erratic behavior over Christmas. If you do this simple favor for us, we might be willing to sweep that whole fake eviction stunt under the rug and welcome you back. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. They had forged my name, stolen my equity, mortgaged my house to the shadow mob, and now they wanted to use my professional medical reputation as a shiny prop to scam more innocent people. I kept my voice perfectly light, entirely agreeable. You know what, Brittany? You are absolutely right. Families should be together on New Year Eve. What time should I arrive tonight? I could practically hear her smug smile through the receiver. The VIP guests arrive at 9 o'clock sharp. Wear something formal, Natalie. Nothing cheap or embarrassing. We are projecting elite wealth tonight. I will be there, I promised, and pressed end. I picked the phone back up to make one final crucial call. I dialed the direct number for the elite catering company. Since I was the one who had personally wired the $15,000 to secure their services, my name was officially listed as the primary financial contact for the entire event. The head caterer answered on the second ring, eager to please the woman paying the massive bill. "Good morning, Dr. Brooks. The kitchen prep is going perfectly. Is there anything you need adjusted for the menu tonight?" "Everything sounds wonderful," I replied smoothly. "I am calling to make a very specific logistical adjustment for the evening. I have a few highly exclusive special VIP guests arriving late. They require absolute discretion and cannot come through the front door where the main crowd is gathered." "Of course," the caterer said immediately. "How can we best accommodate them?" "At exactly 11:30 tonight, I need your staff to unlock the heavy service door at the back of the kitchen," I instructed clearly. "Leave it completely unlatched. Do not put a staff member there to guard it. Just leave it open and return to the main dining room. My guests will let themselves in. Consider it done, Dr. Brooks. We will make sure the path is perfectly clear." I thanked him and hung up the phone. I walked over to my closet and pulled out a stunning floor-length designer gown. Brittany wanted me to project elite wealth. She wanted me to play the happy sister for her little performance. I was going to give her a show she would remember for the rest of her miserable life. It was 5 o'clock on New Year Eve when I finally walked into my master bedroom to get ready. The city outside my window was already painted in deep shadows and glittering lights. I opened my closet and bypassed my comfortable medical scrubs, the very clothes my mother had deemed too disgusting for her elegant home just a week prior. Tonight, I was not Dr. Brooks, the exhausted and discarded scapegoat. I was the executioner. I pulled out a breathtaking floor-length emerald green designer gown. The silk fabric was heavy and expensive, draping perfectly over my frame. I paired it with diamond drop earrings I had bought for myself after my first year as an attending physician and a pair of sharp black stiletto heels. I pinned my hair up into a sleek, elegant twist and applied a bold crimson lipstick. When I looked in the full-length mirror, the transformation was complete. I looked like a woman who owned the room because in a few hours, that would be legally and literally true. But my most important accessories were not my diamonds or my shoes. I walked back into my home office, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. On my massive oak desk sat a sleek black leather portfolio. I opened it to review my arsenal one final time. On the left side was a crisp printed stack of financial ruin. The forensic handwriting report proving the deed was forged, the wire transfer receipts showing Andre skimming the catering money, and the freshly signed contract with Dominic Mercer, legally transferring the title of the suburban colonial to Obsidian Capital creditors while holding my parents and Andre fully liable for the $600,000 debt and all predatory interest. On the right side of the portfolio rested a small silver flash drive. It contained the high-definition audio file of Mitchell Peterson weeping in his cheap office, confessing to the federal real estate fraud Andre forced him to commit. This was not just a folder of documents. It was a bomb waiting to be detonated. I zipped the leather portfolio shut and tucked it securely under my arm. Before leaving the apartment, I made one last phone call. This time, I bypassed the debt collectors and went straight to the federal government. I dialed the direct line for the Federal Bureau of Investigation White-Collar Crime Division in Chicago. I had already submitted an anonymous online tip 2 days prior with Andre name and business address. But tonight, I provided the exact location and time of his massive investor gala. I informed the federal agent on the line that an active multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme operator was currently hosting dozens of potential victims at a private residence and that he was actively soliciting fraudulent wire transfers tonight. I also mentioned the forged real estate documents and the shadow banking loan. The agent tone shifted immediately from routine to highly urgent. I gave them the address, hung up the phone, and walked out the door. The drive to the affluent suburbs took almost 40 minutes. The roads were slick with fresh black ice, and the night air was bitterly cold. I turned the heater up in my sedan, my hands resting lightly on the leather steering wheel. My heart was completely steady. There was no anxiety, no lingering guilt about what I was about to do to my own flesh and blood. They had made their choices when they locked me out in the freezing snow and tried to steal my future. Now they were simply receiving the exact consequences of those choices. As I merged onto the main suburban highway, the streetlights became sparse. I glanced up at my rearview mirror to check the traffic behind me. The road was mostly empty save for a pair of bright halogen headlights maintaining a very specific, consistent distance from my rear bumper. I signaled to change lanes, and the headlights smoothly changed lanes with me. I slowed down slightly, and the vehicle behind me reduced its speed to match mine perfectly. As we passed beneath the harsh glare of a lone street lamp, I could finally see the silhouette of the vehicle. It was a massive, unmarked black SUV with heavily tinted windows. And directly behind that SUV was another one identical in every way. Dominic Mercer had promised to unleash his most aggressive collection agents tonight, and the federal authorities were not far behind. My private security escort had officially arrived. I smiled, pressed my foot gently on the gas pedal, and led the wolves directly to my family front door. I pulled up to the grand wrought iron gates of my parents' colonial, the tires of my sedan crunching softly against the salted driveway. I handed my keys to a hired valet in a white coat. As I stepped out into the freezing night, I glanced over my shoulder. The two unmarked black SUVs did not pull into the driveway. They rolled past the house silently and parked deep in the shadows down the street, killing their headlights. They were waiting for my signal. I turned my attention back to the house, climbing the wide brick steps. This was the exact spot where I had stood shivering in my scrubs just a week ago. Tonight, the heavy wooden door was thrown wide open, spilling warm golden light, and the sound of a string quartet into the freezing air. I walked inside, handing my heavy winter coat to a waiting attendant. The transformation of the interior was genuinely staggering. My parents had spared absolutely no expense burning through the last drops of their stolen loan money. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a brilliant glow over the crowded room. Servers in tailored black uniforms circulated with silver trays of vintage champagne and imported caviar. The room was packed with dozens of strangers. These were Andre carefully selected marks. They were upper-middle-class professionals, dentists and retirees looking to maximize their pensions. They were all completely mesmerized by the illusion of elite wealth, unaware they were standing in a house owned by a shadow banking syndicate. My mother spotted me almost immediately. Susan stood near the fireplace holding court with older investors. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw my emerald designer dress, thrown off that I actually looked the part. But she quickly recovered, pasting on a wide, painfully fake smile as she glided across the floor toward me. "Natalie, darling." Susan projected loudly, making sure everyone nearby could hear her. She pulled me into a theatrical hug, her perfume masking her underlying panic. "I am so thrilled you could make it. Our favorite doctor is finally here. Everyone, this is my eldest daughter. She runs the trauma center downtown." I allowed the hug, nodding to the guests. "You have a beautiful home," one of the older men said, raising his glass to my mother. "Your husband was just telling us about the incredible returns Andre has secured for your family portfolio. It has been absolutely life-changing." Susan lied effortlessly, gripping my arm a little too tightly. "Andre is a financial visionary. We are truly blessed." She pulled me away, her smile instantly dropping. "You look surprisingly decent," she hissed. "Just keep smiling, mingle with the doctors in the corner, and do not say a single word about the house." Brittany descended the grand staircase, making sure all eyes were on her. She wore a backless silver gown that caught the light with every step, but it was the jewelry around her neck that demanded attention. It was a massive diamond necklace, easily worth tens of thousands of dollars. She walked straight up to me, touching the diamonds with a smug gesture. Glad you decided to dress up for once, Natalie. Brittany sneered, looking me up and down. Andre surprised me with this necklace tonight to celebrate the launch of his new portfolio. It is flawless, like everything else he touches. You should really pay attention tonight. Maybe you could learn a thing or two about actual success. I looked at the sparkling diamonds resting against her collarbone. I knew exactly how that necklace was purchased. It was bought with the blood money from the fraudulent hard money loan financed by the syndicate currently parked outside. She was literally wearing the federal evidence around her neck, flaunting it in front of the people her husband was actively trying to scam. It is a stunning piece, Brittany, I said calmly, taking a slow sip from a glass of champagne a server had handed me. Enjoy wearing it tonight. Brittany smirked, missing the dark implication in my tone. Oh, I will. Now, excuse me, my husband is about to speak. A sharp rhythmic tapping echoed through the massive room. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The low murmur of the crowd faded into expectant silence. I turned toward the center of the room. Andre was standing on the second step of the grand staircase, holding a sleek silver microphone. He looked incredibly polished, exuding the calm, magnetic confidence of a billionaire tycoon. He smiled down at the sea of eager, greedy faces, raising his glass in a toast. The trap was fully set, and he was completely unaware that he was about to lock himself inside it. The trap was fully set, and he was completely unaware that he was about to lock himself inside it. Andre tapped the silver microphone a second time, clearing his throat to command the complete attention of the room. Welcome, distinguished guests, he began, his voice deep and smooth, rolling over the crowd like velvet. As we prepare to ring in the new year, I want to take a moment to reflect on the incredible financial journey we have shared. He opened his mouth to continue his practiced pitch, but I did not give him the chance. I moved gracefully through the crowd, my emerald gown sweeping across the polished hardwood floor. I climbed the first 2 steps of the grand staircase, stepping right into his spotlight. Before his brain could register my sudden proximity, I reached out and firmly slipped the microphone directly from his perfectly manicured hand. The string quartet had already stopped, but now the entire room went completely dead silent. Dozens of wealthy, expectant faces turned to look at me. My mother gasped audibly from her spot near the fireplace. I could see the sheer panic flash in Brittany, eyes her hand flying up to touch the stolen diamond necklace resting against her chest. Andre froze, his charming smile instantly hardening into a tight, furious line. Natalie, he hissed under his breath, stepping closer so only I could hear. What are you doing? Give that back to me right now. I ignored him entirely, turning my body to face the sea of investors. Good evening, everyone, I said, my voice projecting crystal clear through the expensive sound system. For those of you I have not yet had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Dr. Natalie Brooks. I am Brittany's older sister and Andre's sister-in-law. A polite, confused ripple of applause moved through the crowd. They clearly thought this was a planned, heartwarming family introduction. Brittany specifically asked me to come here tonight to play the supportive sister. I continued pacing slowly across the landing. She told me how important this evening is for Andre's new portfolio launch. And honestly, standing here in this magnificent house, looking at the crystal chandeliers and the imported caviar, I realized that I have severely underestimated my brother-in-law. I turned to look at Andre. He was rigid, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. Andre is an absolute financial genius, I announced to the crowd, my voice dripping with sweet, lethal sarcasm. In a global market where professional hedge funds fight tooth and nail just to secure a 7% annual yield, Andre somehow manages to guarantee his clients a consistent 20% return every single month. It is mathematically miraculous. It defies every single known law of modern economics. The crowd chuckled, nodding along. They were blinded by their own greed, completely missing the heavy warning layered into my words. They thought I was genuinely praising his impossible success. In fact, I said, raising my free hand to quiet their laughter. I am so deeply fascinated by his unprecedented investment strategy that I thought tonight would be the perfect opportunity for a masterclass. Andre, why do you not explain to your eager investors exactly how you achieve these massive returns? Tell them about the specific offshore accounts. Tell them about your unique licensing credentials with the Securities and Exchange Commission. The color rapidly drained from Andre's face. The confident tycoon vanished, replaced by a terrified fraudster staring down the barrel of a loaded gun. He knew exactly what I was doing. He stepped forward quickly, forcing a loud, booming laugh that sounded entirely hollow. "Thank you, Natalie," Andre said, his voice straining as he reached out to physically grab the microphone from my hand. He plastered on a fake, desperate smile for the crowd. "My sister-in-law is an emergency room doctor, folks. She is used to high-stress situations, not high finance. She always loves to grill me at family dinners. Give it up for Natalie, everyone." He grabbed the top of the microphone, trying to pry it from my fingers with brute force. But I held on with an iron grip, refusing to yield a single inch. I stepped back, forcing him to let go, or risk wrestling a woman in a designer gown in front of his entire client list. He let go, his eyes burning with absolute hatred. "You really should have taken my money, Natalie," he whispered venomously, leaning in close. "You are ruining everything." "I am just getting started," I whispered back. I took another step down the staircase, creating a physical barrier between us. I pulled my smartphone from the hidden pocket of my gown. I did not need him to explain his financial genius to the crowd. I was going to show them. With a single deliberate swipe of my thumb, I bypassed the local network security and directly cast my screen to the massive 85-inch smart television mounted above the living room fireplace. The screen flickered to life. The screen flickered to life. Instead of a slick corporate presentation, the massive 85-inch display illuminated the dim room with cold, hard reality. I had organized the documents meticulously into a slideshow. The first image was a high-definition capture of Andre's primary corporate bank account. The balance at the bottom right corner was not in the millions. It was in the red, showing a negative balance of $14,000. Next to it was a snapshot of a secondary offshore account he bragged about. The current balance was $0. A collective gasp rippled through the living room. The clinking of champagne glasses stopped. The investors suddenly leaned forward, their eyes squinting at the undeniable bank logos and official routing numbers displayed on the screen. "What is this?" a man in a tailored suit asked. "Andre, is that your corporate account?" Before Andre could lie, I tapped my phone screen. The bank accounts vanished, replaced by the forged quitclaim deed. I placed the fake document next to the official forensic handwriting analysis report. I highlighted the expert conclusion in bright yellow. It clearly stated the signature was an intentional forgery. "This is the house we are standing in," I announced. "Andre and my family forged my signature on this deed to steal the equity because his fund is bankrupt. He has no capital. Every single dollar you gave him is gone." The room erupted into chaos. Investors began shouting, demanding answers. A woman dropped her glass, shattering it against the floor. Andre lunged toward me, his face completely pale, but two angry investors instinctively stepped into his path, blocking him from reaching the stairs. "It is a lie," Andre yelled frantically, his voice cracking. "She has been hacking my servers. This is a sophisticated cyber attack. She is a disgruntled family member trying to ruin my reputation with doctored documents. Do not look at the screen." Suddenly, my mother broke through the crowd. Susan sprinted toward the massive television with a speed I had not seen in decades. Her perfectly styled hair was coming undone, but she did not care. She reached the entertainment center, knocking over a tall decorative vase, and frantically began ripping wires out of the wall. She was desperately trying to find the main power cord. "Do not listen to her," Susan shrieked over the angry shouts of the crowd. "Natalie is having a severe mental breakdown. She has been unstable since the hospital put her on leave. She is just jealous of Brittany. She is deeply unwell and making all of this up to destroy our family holiday. Somebody call an ambulance. She needs to be institutionalized. She finally yanked the correct cord. The massive television screen instantly went black. Susan leaned against the wall, breathing heavily, clutching the thick black power cord to her chest, as if she had just saved their lives. She looked at the crowd with wild, panicked eyes, attempting a reassuring smile that looked entirely psychotic. "See?" Susan panted, her voice trembling. "It is over. It is just a terrible episode. Let us all just calm down and have some champagne." But cutting the power to the television only stopped the visual presentation. It did not disconnect my smartphone from the wireless surround sound system built directly into the ceiling of the house. I looked down at my mother, her desperate attempt to silence the truth only proving her guilt. "I am not having a mental breakdown, Mom," I said, clearly looking into her panicked eyes, "and I do not need a screen to finish this presentation." I pressed play on my smartphone. The audio file I secretly recorded in the freezing office days ago began broadcasting through the hidden speakers, echoing powerfully from every corner of the grand living room. The reedy, terrified voice of Mitchell Peterson, the corrupt notary, filled the air. "He made me do it." Mitchell's weeping voice rang out. "I owed him money. He said if I just stamped the deed, my debt would be entirely forgiven." My own voice, calm and clinical, replied through the speakers. "Why did he need you to stamp a forged deed to a suburban house? Why take such a massive legal risk?" The crowd stood frozen, listening to the damning truth. The investors looked at each other, realizing their life savings had vanished into thin air. "Because he is completely broke," Dr. Brooks Mitchell confessed over the audio. "His entire investment firm is a massive hollow lie. He just takes new money from gullible people to pay off the old investors. It is a textbook Ponzi scheme. He needed the raw equity from your house to take out a high-interest shadow loan just to keep his most dangerous clients from killing him." The audio file ended, leaving only a heavy static hum in the air. For exactly 3 seconds, the massive living room was completely silent. Then total and absolute chaos erupted. The polite, elegantly dressed crowd transformed instantly into a furious mob. The realization that their life savings, their retirement funds, and their children's college accounts had vanished into thin air shattered their wealthy decorum entirely. A tall man in a tailored suit dropped his champagne flute. It shattered against the hardwood floor, but nobody cared. He lunged forward, grabbing Andre by the lapels of his custom charcoal suit. "Where is my money?" the man roared, his face turning purple with rage. "I wired you $400,000 on Tuesday. Where is it?" Andre stumbled backward, his hands held up defensively, his smooth talking charm completely evaporating under the threat of physical violence. "Please just listen to me," Andre stammered frantically, trying to peel the man-hands off his jacket. "It is a temporary liquidity issue. We just need to restructure the assets." "Liar," a woman screamed from the back of the room. She pushed her way to the front, pointing a shaking finger directly at my father. "Richard told me this was a guaranteed municipal bond fund. You both sat in my living room and swore my pension was safe. You stole from us." My father backed away, his face slick with terrified sweat. He bumped into the fireplace mantel, knocking over several expensive silver picture frames. "Now everyone, please remain calm," Richard pleaded, his voice cracking pitifully. "There has been a terrible misunderstanding. We are victims here too. We trusted Andre just like you did." The crowd was not listening. They closed in, shouting threats, demanding police intervention, and demanding their cash. Several investors pulled out their cell phones, frantically checking their banking apps, as if the missing numbers might magically reappear. The elegant New Year Eve gala had devolved into a frantic crime scene. Amidst the shouting and the shoving, Brittany realized the ship was rapidly sinking. She saw her luxurious fake life collapsing in real time, and she instantly deployed her most reliable defense mechanism. She burst into violent theatrical tears. Brittany collapsed onto the bottom step of the grand staircase, burying her face in her hands. She began to sob loudly, her shoulders shaking with exaggerated grief. She looked up at the angry crowd, her mascara running perfectly down her cheeks to create the ultimate picture of a betrayed wife. The heavy diamond necklace resting against her chest caught the light, completely contradicting her sudden claim of innocence. "I had absolutely no idea," Brittany wailed, clutching her expensive silver dress. "I swear to you, I knew nothing about any of this. I thought my husband was a legitimate businessman. I thought he was brilliant. He lied to me every single day. He used me. He used my family. I am just an innocent victim in his sick, twisted game." She looked up at me, her tear-filled eyes begging for solidarity. "Natalie, please tell them. Tell them I am not smart enough to understand high finance. Tell them Andre kept me completely in the dark. I am your sister." I looked down at her, completely unmoved by her Oscar-worthy performance. The crowd hushed slightly, turning their attention to me, waiting to see if I would validate the weeping woman on the stairs. I slowly unzipped the black leather portfolio tucked under my arm. I pulled out a stapled stack of printed emails. "You are a terrible actress, Brittany," I said coldly, my voice carrying easily over the lingering murmurs of the angry investors. "You did not just know about the Ponzi scheme, you actively participated in the real estate fraud that funded it." "I did not!" Brittany shrieked, her fake tears pausing for a second of genuine panic. "You are lying. You are just trying to ruin me." I flipped to the first page of the printed stack. "This is an email exchange from 11 months ago, retrieved directly from Andre's unsecured corporate server by my private investigator." I looked directly at the crowd, raising the papers for them to see. I will read it out loud for everyone. It is from Brittany personal email address sent to Andre at 2 in the morning. I cleared my throat and read the damning words. The email says, "Andre, I finally got Natalie's signature down perfectly. I practiced it 50 times on a legal pad until the slant matched her old medical school applications. I am attaching the scanned copy. Print it on the quitclaim deed and take it to Mitchell office tomorrow to get the notary stamp. Make sure you tip him well so he keeps his mouth shut. We need this loan approved by Friday or we lose the country club membership." The entire room gasped. Brittany's face went completely ashen. She stopped crying instantly, her mouth hanging open in absolute horror. "You did not just know about the forgery, Brittany," I said, dropping the printed emails right into her lap. "You were the one who held the pen." The papers scattered across Brittany's lap like confetti. She stared down at her own words, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. The absolute, undeniable proof of her guilt had completely short-circuited her brain. The investors pressing in around the staircase saw the printed emails, read the bold text on the pages, and their fury shifted. They were no longer just looking at Andre. They were looking at my entire family as a coordinated syndicate of thieves. My father pushed his way through the angry mob. Richard was sweating profusely, the moisture glistening on his forehead under the bright crystal chandeliers. His expensive silk tie was skewed and his face was the color of chalk. He stumbled up the first 2 steps of the staircase, placing himself between me and the furious crowd. He raised his trembling hands in a gesture of absolute surrender. "Natalie, please!" Richard begged, his voice cracking with a pathetic, desperate edge I had never heard before. He reached out to grab my arm, but I took a calculated step back, refusing to let him touch me. "You have made your point. You have exposed everything. You won. Now please, you have to stop this before it goes any further. You are destroying your own family." I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing. "You destroyed yourselves, Dad. I am just providing the autopsy report." The crowd was growing louder, their demands for their money escalating into threats of calling the police. Richard looked back at the angry faces, then turned back to me, his eyes wide with sheer panic. He lowered his voice to a frantic whisper. "We can fix this," Richard pleaded, his breath coming in short gasps. "We can pay them back. Every single dollar. We will sell the house, Natalie. We will put it on the market tomorrow morning. It is a prime piece of suburban real estate. It will easily fetch enough to cover Andre's debts and pay back all the investors. We will give them all their money, And nobody has to go to jail. We are your blood, Natalie. You cannot send your parents to federal prison. Please just tell them we are liquidating the asset. Tell them they will be made completely whole." He looked up at me with tears welling in his eyes. It was the ultimate manipulation. The golden child was caught, the perfect son-in-law was a fraud, and so my father reverted to the only strategy he had left. He actually believed that despite everything they had done to me, I would still step in and act as their personal shield. Susan had abandoned the broken television and pushed her way to the base of the stairs, nodding frantically. "Yes, Natalie!" she cried out, her voice stripped of all its former arrogance. "We will sell the house. We will do whatever it takes. Just please call off these people. Save us." They thought the house was their ultimate bargaining chip, their final safety net. They had no idea the safety net had already been cut. I stood tall on the staircase, looking down at my father's sweating face and my mother tear-stained cheeks. I spoke clearly and loudly, ensuring every single furious investor in the room could hear. "You cannot sell the house, Dad," I said, my voice ringing out with absolute finality. Richard blinked, completely confused. "What do you mean?" "Of course we can sell it. We hold the deed. It is our property." I smiled, a cold, empty expression. "You do not hold the deed," I corrected him. "You forged the deed to take out a $600,000 hard money loan from a shadow banking syndicate. And since Andre burned through all that cash playing fake billionaire, the loan officially went into default 3 days ago." Susan gasped, covering her mouth with her trembling hands. Richard stared at me, his eyes darting frantically. "You cannot sell the house," I repeated slowly, "because I just signed an affidavit proving the forgery, and I legally transferred the clean title directly to the hard money lenders you defrauded. I gave it to them this morning." Richard slumped against the wooden banister, his mouth hanging open in absolute defeat as the reality crashed down on him. "But they will come after us for the rest of the money," he whispered in pure horror. I nodded calmly. "Yes, they will. In fact, I made it a strict condition of the transfer that they hold you, Mom, and Andre entirely responsible for the massive remaining debt and all the predatory interest. And you do not have to wait for them to call you Dad, because they are parked in the unmarked black SUVs waiting right outside." Before Richard could even process the magnitude of what I had just said, the towering antique grandfather clock in the grand hallway began to chime. The deep, resonant sound echoed through the sudden silence of the living room, marking exactly 11:45 p.m. The final chime had barely faded into the air when the heavy, solid oak front doors burst completely open. The force of the impact sent the doors crashing violently against the interior walls. A blast of freezing Chicago winter wind whipped through the grand foyer, instantly extinguishing the dozens of expensive scented candles my mother had carefully placed around the room. The elegant atmosphere evaporated in a single second. The investors gasped, stepping back as a flood of heavily armed personnel stormed into the house. They were not just the ruthless debt collectors I had promised. It was a fully coordinated raid. Dozens of men and women wearing dark tactical windbreakers poured into the foyer. Emblazoned across their chests and backs in bright yellow lettering were the letters FBI. The Federal Bureau of Investigation Financial Crimes Unit had officially arrived to crash the party. Federal agents, a loud, commanding voice boomed over the rising panic of the crowd. "Nobody move. Keep your hands where we can see them and stay exactly where you are. This property is now an active federal crime scene." The sheer visual shock of federal agents storming a black-tie New Year Eve gala paralyzed the entire room. The string quartet musicians abandoned their expensive instruments and raised their hands in the air. The wealthy investors who just minutes ago were screaming for their money now fell completely silent, terrified by the sudden presence of federal law enforcement. Dominic Mercer stepped through the open doorway right behind the lead federal agents. He was wearing his immaculate dark suit, entirely unbothered by the freezing wind. He held a thick leather folder under his arm, projecting the calm, terrifying aura of a man who legally owned the ground we were standing on. He caught my eye across the crowded room and gave a single respectful nod. He had brought the authorities just as I knew he would, using the federal raid as the perfect cover to physically secure his newly acquired real estate asset. Agents immediately fanned out across the first floor, securing all the exits and blocking the staircases. The lead agent pulled out a stack of federal warrants, his eyes scanning the terrified crowd. "We have a federal arrest warrant for Andre Davis," the agent announced, his voice carrying easily across the silent room. "Step forward immediately." I turned my head to look for my brother-in-law. Andre was standing frozen near the grand piano, his custom charcoal suit blending into the shadows. The smug, confident tycoon had completely vanished. His eyes were wide with animalistic terror. He looked at the federal agents securing the front door, then he looked at the angry investors blocking his path. He was completely surrounded by the consequences of his own greed. But a cornered rat will always try to run. Andre suddenly lunged to his right. He shoved violently past an elderly woman in a sequined dress, sending her stumbling into a waiter. A silver tray of champagne glasses crashed to the hardwood floor, the shattering glass echoing sharply through the room. "He is running," an agent shouted, pointing directly at Andre's retreating figure. Andre sprinted frantically toward the dining room, his expensive leather shoes slipping wildly on the polished floor. He knew the layout of the house better than the agents. He knew there was a heavy service door at the very back of the catering kitchen that led directly to the dark wooded alley behind the property. If he could just make it out into the freezing night, he thought he could disappear into the sprawling suburban neighborhood. He burst through the heavy wooden swinging doors of the kitchen, knocking a terrified caterer out of his way. The kitchen was a chaotic space filled with stainless steel prep tables and boiling pots. Andre scrambled past the stoves, his eyes locked entirely on the metal service door at the very back. He grabbed the handle, expecting to have to unlock the deadbolt, but the handle turned easily in his grasp. The door was completely unlatched. It was the exact door I had specifically instructed the head caterer to leave wide open for my special VIP guests at 11:30. Andre threw the heavy door open, stepping out into the freezing winter night. He let out a breathless gasp of relief, thinking he had actually made it. He took exactly one step onto the concrete loading dock before his world violently collapsed. 3 federal agents in full tactical gear were already waiting in the dark alley, having entered through the open gate minutes earlier. Before Andre could even scream, a massive agent tackled him squarely in the chest. The sheer force of the impact lifted Andre completely off his feet. He crashed down hard onto the freezing concrete, the breath knocked completely out of his lungs. 2 more agents instantly descended on him, pinning his shoulders and arms to the icy ground. The metallic, undeniable click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around his wrists echoed sharply into the night air. The loud sound of Andre hitting the freezing concrete pavement echoed sharply through the open kitchen doors, carrying all the way back into the grand living room. The lead federal agent inside the house tapped his earpiece, listened for a brief second, and gave a sharp nod of confirmation. He turned his attention back to the terrified crowd of investors. He ordered the remaining guests to line up against the far wall of the dining room. They needed to have their identities processed and their statements recorded before anyone would be allowed to leave the active crime scene. The investors complied immediately, completely silent, watching the horrific family drama unfold before them. 2 female federal agents stepped forward from the entryway, their eyes locked directly on my parents. Richard and Susan were still standing near the base of the grand staircase, frozen in absolute shock. The agents did not approach them with the polite deference my parents were so accustomed to receiving. They treated them exactly like what they were, federal suspects in a massive financial syndicate. One agent pulled a thick stack of papers from her tactical vest. I recognized the documents immediately. It was the commercial deed of trust, the hard money loan origination documents, and the forged quitclaim deed I had handed over to the authorities. The agent held the documents up directly in front of my father. "Richard Brooks and Susan Brooks," she stated, her voice projecting with absolute unquestionable authority. We have sworn affidavits and forensic handwriting evidence indicating you knowingly participated in federal wire fraud, real estate fraud, and the facilitation of a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. Your physical signatures are on these fraudulent loan documents. Richard shook his head wildly, holding his hands up defensively, as if he could physically push the federal evidence away. No. He stammered, his voice, weak, raspy, and completely stripped of its usual arrogant bluster. We did not do anything wrong. We just signed exactly what Andre told us to sign. We did not know he was stealing from these people. We are victims in this too. We lost our entire retirement savings. The agent was completely unmoved by his pathetic excuses. You used a forged legal document to secure $600,000 against a property you did not legally own, she replied sharply, her tone cutting through his lies. Ignorance is not a valid legal defense for federal real estate fraud. Turn around and put your hands behind your back right now. That was the exact moment reality finally broke through my mother and her decades of carefully constructed delusions. The sight of the federal agent reaching to her belt for a pair of heavy steel handcuffs shattered her completely. Susan let out a guttural, agonizing wail that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. Her knees buckled beneath her expensive designer velvet dress, and she collapsed entirely onto the polished hardwood floor. She did not fall gracefully. She hit the ground hard, her perfect hair falling in a messy tangle around her face. Susan ignored the federal agent standing directly over her. Instead, she crawled on her hands and knees across the floor, reaching out with desperate, trembling fingers to grab the hem of my emerald green gown. She looked up at me, her face completely ruined by tears and smeared expensive makeup. Natalie, she sobbed hysterically, her fingers digging desperately into the silk fabric of my dress. Please, tell them they are making a terrible mistake. Tell them it is just a big family misunderstanding. You are a highly respected doctor. They will listen to you. We are your parents. You cannot let them take us away in handcuffs like common criminals. I am so sorry about Christmas Eve. I am sorry about everything. Just please save us. I stood perfectly still on the staircase looking down at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel completely worthless. I looked at her manicured hands clutching my dress, the exact same hands that had shoved a flimsy plastic container of cold ham at me and locked me out in the freezing snow. For 33 years I had craved her approval. I had worked myself to the bone trying to prove I was worthy of her love. But standing here now, watching her grovel on the floor of a house she tried to steal from me, I realized I did not need her approval at all. I was entirely free from her toxic grip. I gently but firmly pulled the fabric of my gown out of her desperate grasp. I took one step down, bringing myself closer to her eye level. My voice was perfectly calm, completely devoid of anger, sorrow, or pity. I am not going to lie to the federal government for you, Mom, I said clearly, ensuring the agents heard every word. You made your choices. You chose Andre. You chose the fake wealth. You chose to forge my name. Now you get to experience the consequences. Susan let out another piercing wail, reaching for me again, but the federal agents stepped in immediately. They grabbed her arms, pulling her roughly up from the floor and securing the steel handcuffs tightly around her wrists. She kicked and screamed, thrashing wildly as they loudly read her Miranda rights. Richard stood silently nearby, already handcuffed, his head hanging down in total, absolute defeat. I watched the agents march them toward the open front door out into the freezing Chicago night. Before they crossed the threshold, my mother turned her head, looking back at me with absolute devastation. You told me there was no room for me at the table, Mom. Now you will have a steel table all to yourselves. As the federal agents escorted my weeping mother and completely defeated father out the front door, the harsh, flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers illuminated the grand foyer. I turned my attention back to the grand staircase. Brittany was still sitting there, frozen in absolute terror. She had watched her husband get tackled in the alley and her parents get marched out in steel handcuffs. Now the lead female agent was walking directly toward her, holding the printed emails I had dropped onto her lap. Brittany scrambled backward up the stairs, her expensive silver gown catching on the wooden banister. "You cannot arrest me," she shrieked, her voice completely losing its refined upper-class pitch. "I am a mother. I have a child upstairs sleeping in the nursery with the nanny. You cannot take me away from my baby. I did not do anything wrong." The agent did not slow down. She reached the steps and grabbed Brittany by the arm, pulling her firmly to her feet. "We have documented digital evidence of your direct participation in forging federal documents," the agent stated, her voice echoing in the quiet room. "You are being charged as a co-conspirator in a multi-million-dollar fraud syndicate," Brittany thrashed wildly, but the agent was highly trained and easily overpowered her, locking her wrists into tight metal cuffs. As she struggled, the massive diamond necklace shifted against her collarbone, catching the bright light of the crystal chandeliers. The agent paused, her eyes locking onto the jewelry. "Take that off me," Brittany sobbed completely, misunderstanding the agent's stare. "It is scratching my neck." "Oh, I will definitely take it off," the agent replied coolly. She reached behind Brittany's neck and unclasped the heavy diamond piece. "This necklace was purchased with stolen funds. It is officially being confiscated as material evidence and proceeds of a federal crime." The agent dropped the glittering diamonds into a clear plastic evidence bag. Brittany let out a hollow, devastated gasp, realizing she was being stripped of the very wealth she had used to belittle me just an hour ago. Two agents grabbed her by the arms and marched her out the front door, her silver dress dragging pathetically across the floor. With my family entirely removed from the house, the atmosphere shifted. The federal agents began systematically interviewing the investors. These were people who had just lost their life savings, but the initial shock and rage had morphed into a grim realization. As I stood near the fireplace, a silver-haired man in a tailored suit approached me. It was the same man who had grabbed Andre by the lapels earlier. "Dr. Brooks," the man said, his voice heavy with exhaustion, "I just wanted to thank you." I looked at him, slightly surprised. "I just told you that your money is gone." He nodded slowly, a bitter smile crossing his face. "Yes, the money I invested is gone." But Andre was pushing me relentlessly to wire another $500,000 tomorrow morning to secure a spot in his fake new portfolio. "If you had not stood up on that staircase tonight and exposed this entire operation, I would have lost my home and my business by Friday. You saved us from losing everything." Several other investors echoed his sentiment, offering quiet words of gratitude before stepping out into the freezing night. I had not set out to be their savior. I only wanted to extract the cancer from my own life, but seeing the genuine relief on their faces brought a profound sense of closure. The federal agents finished tagging the crime scene and began filtering out, leaving only Dominic Mercer and his team of ruthless collection agents inside the foyer. Mercer walked over to the heavy wooden front door and signaled his men. They immediately began swapping out the deadbolts and installing heavy-duty padlocks. Mercer approached me, buttoning his dark wool overcoat. "The property is officially secured, Dr. Brooks," he said smoothly. "We will begin liquidating the assets inside tomorrow to recoup the principal loan. You played this game perfectly." I nodded to him, pulling my own winter coat tightly around my shoulders. I walked out the front door, stepping down the brick stairs into the freezing Chicago air. A row of federal vehicles idled in the driveway. Richard and Susan were standing next to a black SUV, shivering violently in the cold, waiting to be loaded into the back seat. Mercer walked right past me, holding a thick legal clipboard. He stepped directly in front of my parents. "Richard Brooks," Mercer announced, his voice slicing through the cold wind. "I represent Obsidian Capital creditors. This document is a formal declaration of immediate asset seizure. We have officially taken full possession of this property due to your massive loan default. You are ordered to vacate the premises immediately, permanently, and without any of your personal belongings. The house is ours. You have absolutely nothing left." Exactly 6 months passed. The blistering cold of that unforgettable Chicago winter melted away, replaced by the heavy heat of a Midwestern July. I sat silently in the mahogany pews of a federal courthouse downtown, completely removed from the sterile environment of my emergency room. I was not there to testify. My recorded evidence and the paper trail I handed over to the FBI had done all the heavy lifting. I was simply there as an observer watching the final curtain fall on the absolute destruction my family brought upon themselves. The courtroom was quiet save for the rhythmic tapping of the court reporter keyboard. The federal judge, a stern woman with absolutely no patience for white-collar criminals, looked down from her elevated bench. Standing before her wearing a bright orange jumpsuit instead of his custom-tailored charcoal suits was Andre. He looked significantly older. The stress of spending 6 months in a federal holding facility had stripped away his magnetic charm. His hair was thinning, his posture slumped, and his eyes darted nervously. The judge did not mince words. She detailed the absolute devastation Andre had caused, outlining the millions of dollars stolen from hardworking retirement accounts. She called his Ponzi scheme a calculated predatory assault on trusting individuals. When she finally handed down the sentence, her voice was like a heavy iron gavel. Andre received 10 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. He flinched, his shoulders collapsing entirely as the federal marshals stepped forward to escort him away. He did not look back. Next came Brittany. My sister stood at the defense table wearing a drab, ill-fitting gray suit. She had tried her absolute best to play the innocent, betrayed wife throughout the legal process. But the emails I provided clearly showing her eagerly forging my signature and conspiring to bribe a federal notary completely destroyed her victim narrative. When the judge addressed her, Brittany instantly began to sob, deploying the same theatrical tears she used in our living room. But federal judges are not manipulated by tears. The judge reprimanded Brittany for her profound greed and active participation in the fraud syndicate. She was sentenced to 3 years in a minimum security federal prison. As the bailiff approached to handcuff her, Brittany turned wildly toward the gallery, her tear-streaked face searching frantically for a savior who no longer existed. She was led out through the side door, her cries echoing briefly before the heavy wood slammed shut. Sitting 2 rows ahead of me were Richard and Susan. They had managed to avoid federal prison sentences by cutting a desperate plea deal, willingly testifying against Andre and throwing their own daughter under the bus. But freedom came at an astronomical cost. They were completely and permanently ruined. Obsidian Capital had entirely seized the suburban house to cover the hard money loan. My parents were forced into absolute bankruptcy. Their credit was completely destroyed, their bank accounts were frozen and drained for restitution, and they were currently living in a cramped, foul-smelling motel on the outskirts of the city, surviving solely on meager Social Security checks. The proceedings concluded and the gallery began to empty. I stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored blazer, and walked out into the bright marble hallway of the courthouse. I was heading toward the elevators when I heard frantic, shuffling footsteps behind me. "Natalie, wait. Please, Natalie, wait a minute." I stopped and turned around. Susan was practically running toward me. She looked incredibly frail. Her expensive highlights had faded into gray roots, and the designer velvet dresses were gone, replaced by a faded, wrinkled cardigan. She stopped a few feet away from me, panting heavily, her eyes completely bloodshot. "Natalie, I am so glad I caught you," Susan said, her voice trembling pathetically. "We have absolutely nothing left. The motel rent took our entire check this month. Your father has not eaten a hot meal in 2 days. We are starving. I know we made terrible mistakes, but please, I just need a small loan. Just $100 for some basic groceries. You are my daughter. You cannot let us starve." She reached out her trembling hand, expecting me to dispense cash one last time. I looked at her outstretched hand, feeling absolutely no pity. I calmly reached into my leather tote bag. I did not pull out my wallet. Instead, I pulled out a cheap, flimsy plastic container holding cold ham and potatoes. It was the exact Tupperware she had shoved into my hands on Christmas Eve. I placed the cold container directly into her trembling hands. "Enjoy the leftovers, Mom," I said. I turned my back and walked onto the elevator, leaving her alone in the hallway. The heavy steel doors of the elevator slid shut, cutting off the sight of my mother standing alone in the marble hallway with her plastic container of cold ham. As the elevator descended toward the lobby, I felt a physical weight lift from my shoulders. A burden I had carried for 33 years simply evaporated into the thin air. I walked out into the bright afternoon sun, stepped into my car, and drove forward into a life that was finally entirely mine. Fast forward 1 year. It was Christmas Eve again, but the freezing Chicago snow falling outside my floor-to-ceiling windows felt beautiful rather than bitter. I stood in the center of my newly purchased penthouse condo, the warm glow of the stone fireplace reflecting off the pristine glass. The air was filled with the rich, savory scent of roasted prime rib garlic herbs and fresh pine from the towering tree in the corner. But the most beautiful part of the evening was not the luxury of the apartment or the expensive decorations. It was the sound. My home was filled with loud, genuine, joyous laughter. There were no tense whispers, no performative displays of fake wealth, and absolutely no conditional love. I walked into the dining room carrying a heavy tray of warm appetizers and smiled at the people gathered around my custom-made 12-foot-long oak dining table. These were the people who had stood by me during my most exhausting 16-hour shifts. Sitting near the center of the table was Dr. David Mitchell, the chief of surgery who had mentored me for years. Next to him was head nurse Maria, holding a glass of red wine and telling a hilarious story about a chaotic night in the trauma bay. My best friend from medical school, Ryan, was arguing playfully with his husband over who made the better holiday cocktail. There were 15 people in my home tonight. Friends, colleagues, and chosen family. They were all completely relaxed, safe, and genuinely happy to be there. I set the tray down on the massive table. It was overflowing with incredible food, set with heavy ceramic plates, crystal glasses, and proper silverware. There were no flimsy plastic tubs of leftovers tonight. There was an abundance of warmth, an abundance of food, and most importantly, an abundance of space. Maria caught my eye across the room and smiled, raising her glass in a silent, supportive toast. I nodded back, feeling a deep, profound sense of peace settle completely into my chest. For so long, I had believed that family was strictly defined by biology. I thought that because we shared the same blood, I owed them my loyalty, my resources, and my endless forgiveness. I thought I had to endure their cruelty and their manipulation just to keep my seat at their table. But the truth is, toxic family members rely entirely on that biological guilt to keep you trapped in their cycle of abuse. They expect you to absorb their poison and blindly call it love. As a doctor, I spend my life healing people, but I had to learn the hardest medical lesson of all on myself. You cannot heal a body while a cancer is actively destroying it from the inside out. You have to be brave enough to cut the diseased parts out completely, even if it hurts, even if it leaves a scar. Because once the toxicity is gone, the body can finally recover. Once I cut my parents and my sister out of my life, the constant anxiety, the self-doubt, and the desperate need for their validation vanished. I was left with a beautiful, peaceful space to build the life I actually deserved. I picked up my own glass of champagne and gently tapped it with a silver spoon. The ringing sound caught the attention of the room, and the laughter settled into a warm, attentive silence. My chosen family turned to look at me, their faces reflecting genuine respect and love. "I just want to thank all of you for being here tonight," I said, my voice steady and full of gratitude. "You have shown me what real support looks like. You celebrate my victories without jealousy, and you stand by me through the chaos without asking for a price tag. Let us raise a glass to the family we choose." We all raised our glasses toward the center of the table. "Merry Christmas, everyone," I said, smiling warmly. "I am so glad you are here, because at this table, there is always more than enough room for you." The room erupted in cheerful agreement as glasses clinked together. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members and build your own chosen family? How did you find the strength to cut them out? I would absolutely love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who might need the courage to leave a toxic table behind. Your worth is never determined by the people who refuse to see it. Remember, you hold the power to write your own ending. The story of Natalie teaches us a profound and difficult lesson about the true nature of family. We are often taught from a young age that blood relations are sacred, and that we must endure any amount of mistreatment simply because we share a genetic link. However, Natalie's journey proves that biology is a starting point, not a life sentence. The most powerful lesson here is that you have the absolute right to walk away from toxic people, even if those people are your own parents or siblings. Toxic relatives often weaponize the concept of family to maintain control. They use guilt and obligation to turn you into a reliable resource, extracting your time, your money, and your emotional energy, while offering nothing but criticism in return. Natalie spent decades trying to earn a seat at a table where she was never truly valued. But true strength is recognizing when a relationship has become a parasitic infection. As Natalie said, sometimes you must amputate the rotting limbs to save the rest of the body. You do not owe your success to people who actively plot your downfall. Peace comes from setting firm boundaries and refusing to be the designated scapegoat for someone else's dysfunction. By cutting out the people who only saw her as a financial safety net, Natalie created the space to build a chosen family filled with genuine respect and unconditional support. You are allowed to protect your peace, and you are allowed to build a table where your presence is celebrated instead of merely tolerated. If you are currently sacrificing your own mental health to keep toxic relatives happy, I urge you to reevaluate your boundaries and take the necessary steps to prioritize your own well-being today.